On April 28, 1806, a fleet of 3 ships was approaching a South American coast. Inside the ships were dozens of men and a shipment of weapons with the intention of starting an invasion. But 2 Coast Guard ships intercept the invading ships and manage to catch 2 of them. It is the beginning of a nightmare for dozens of men who would live on death row in a South American prison, and among them was the grandson of a former president of the United States. This story begins a few years earlier, in London, when William Stephen Smith and Francisco de Miranda met. Smith was married since 1786 to Abigail Adams Smith, a daughter of John Adams, the second President of the United States. When his father-in-law was United States Minister to the United Kingdom, Smith was his secretary, and then he met Miranda. Miranda was a subject of the Kingdom of Spain, born in Venezuela, which at that time was a Spaniard province in South America. Miranda belonged to an aristocratic family and had served in the Spanish Army, participating in the American Revolutionary War. Believing in revolutionary ideas, Miranda volunteered to the revolutionary forces during the French Revolution, promoted to general, and his service was so distinguished that his name would be placed on the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. General Miranda had plans to start a revolution in the Spanish provinces on the American continent, to make these territories independent from the Spanish Empire and turn them into independent countries. Smith, who was a colonel in the U.S. Army, enthusiastically joined the Miranda conspiracy and became its main sponsor in the USA. Smith recruited a wealthy New Jersey businessman, Samuel Ogden, to finance the adventure. The 3 men bought weapons and 3 ships, 1 larger and 2 smaller. They also recruited a small private army of between 180 and 200 filibusters, mostly American mercenaries. The idea was to make a landing on the Venezuelan coast and create a focus of armed rebellion with the expectation of receiving popular support to start a secessionist revolution. Among the men of the relatively small invading force was William Steuben Smith, a son of Colonel Smith and a grandson of Adams, a 19-year-old boy at the time. On April 28, 1806, the small invading fleet was approaching the Venezuelan coastal town of Ocumare de la Costa, where they intended to disembark. But they were intercepted by 2 Spanish Coast Guard ships. The largest ship of the filibusters, the Leander, managed to escape, but the 2 smallest ships, the Bacchus and the Bee, were captured by the Spanish Navy, and 60 men were taken prisoner, including the young Smith, grandson of the former President Adams. The men were taken to the Castillo de San Felipe, a Spanish military prison located in a castle, in the Venezuelan coastal city of Puerto Cabello. Prisoners would be tried in the Spanish courts for piracy, and according to the Spanish laws of that time they could be sentenced to death, including Adams' grandson. Meanwhile, in the USA a scandal broke out. Colonel Smith and businessman Ogden were charged with committing federal crimes for violating the Neutrality Act of 1794, which made it illegal for U.S. citizens from waging war against any country at peace with the USA. Both men were indicted by a federal grand jury in New York. But Smith claimed he sponsored Miranda's expedition by orders of President Thomas Jefferson and Secretary of State James Madison, implicating the President and the Secretary of State in the crimes. Jefferson and Madison refused to appear in court. William Patterson, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, at that time ruled that the President cannot authorize a person to do what the law forbids. Both Colonel Smith and Ogden stood trial and were found not guilty. The young Smith, Adams' grandson, managed to escape from prison in Puerto Cabello and return from Venezuela to the United States, but 10 of his adventure companions were sentenced to death by the Spanish courts and hanged, and their bodies were beheaded and quartered as a warning. A tragic epilogue.